don't skip. Fluss is not on this list, even though it does fit the list. Why? Because it is going on another list and I don't want to feature it in 2 lists. So stay tuned. My name is Jakob. I'm from Sweden, where we have stuff like this. So these lists used to be my own top lists, but they stopped being that back in 2021 when I started a new tradition. I started asking you, my audience, about your favorites that came out during whatever previous year. And I did that this time too. And here are the results. Now, I will be trying to provide you with the WHMIS for each and every one of these synthesizers. And what is the WHMIS? Well, it's just an abbreviation for what makes it special. The first synthesizer I'm going to talk about is the number one. Not this number one, but this number one. You know, you can tell how proud I am over that joke. Number by Ice Gear. What makes it special? Well, anything can be an operator. That is a quote I stole from a viewer who commented on a previous video, and then I forgot who that viewer was. The viewer came back and reminded me, but also told me that they, just as me, were too lazy to find the original comment. So I guess it's lost on the internet. Anyway, what's important is anything in Nambu can be an operator. Plus, the feature depth is insane. So this is a semi-modular synthesizer where you can switch out the modules inside the operators. They don't have to be FM operators. They can be an audio generating module or they can be a processing module. And one of the most fun modules in here is the resonator one. Nambu is so powerful because you can route signals any way you want, you can load modules any way you want, and there's so much modulation in this thing that has such depth to them that it's easy to get lost in the synthesizer. Nambu is not something I'd recommend for really new beginners when it comes to synthesizers, but for seasoned synthesizer users, you just can't go wrong with this one. It's just too much fun. It's like having a synthesizer DIY platform. If you missed it, if you haven't watched it yet, I suggest you go and check my in-depth video on Nambu. I've linked to the video down in the pinned comment, of course, and you can also find it in the description. Alright, so this was my number one from 2022, but it wasn't yours. If we take a look at the polls again, there are 2 clear winners here. It's this one and this one. And yes, I'm allowing for 2 top ones in this video, and if you don't like it, fuck. The next one I want to talk about is the one that isn't really a synthesizer. Next up is VHS Synth by AudioKit in collaboration with Brian Funk. And no, VHS Synth is not a synth, it's a rompler. And how do you make a rompler? Well, you multi-sample something and you spread it out over a keyboard and then you add synth stuff on top. So in the end, it plays like a synth, sounds like a synth, kind of feels like a synth, but it's not a synth. So does it really matter? Not really. However, had I taken VHS Synth off this list, you would have burned me at the stakes. VHS Synth. What makes it special? Well, I really can't talk for you, but I can talk for myself. And I must say, just as Patrick from the GarageBand Guide says,
nostalgia is powerful.
Yes, nostalgia is very powerful. The graphical design sends me back to the 80s. The sound sends me back to the 80s. And I mean, when we talk about the sounds, I mean, come on, that's ridiculous, in a good ridiculous way. I would say it's very easy for any beginners to just pick this one up and get started. It's just a rumpler with a bunch of retro sounding effects in there. And I especially love this thing that adds wobbly drunkenness to the pitch of your patches. And I think that's why VHS Synth has become the #1 synth from 2022. And if you missed it, I did an in-depth docutorial going through VHS Synth, including interview segments with Brian Funk himself. attaQ basically built an instrument out of all of the samples that Brian recorded through a VCR. You can find that video down in the pinned comment and also in the description.
Once it goes in there, then you record it back into Ableton Live and you get all of that kind of like, all the problems with the VHS, like the kind of warping, the movement, the push and pull, and just an overall hiss that's on top of everything.
Now, the next thing I want to talk about is one that got less votes than, well, basically I thought it would get. I thought everybody would be throwing themselves over this one, and it's Trooper Synthesizer by Yonak Inc. Now, I'm gonna be real with you. There were two things that made me want to make a deep, in-depth docutorial on this synthesizer. Number one, well, a lot of people seem to think that this was a Moog clone when it came out. They either called it a Moog clone or asked if it was. Now, I couldn't fault these people because of how the synthesizer looked, but I knew that it probably wasn't. The second reason I wanted to make a docutorial on this synthesizer was because I get to interview people when I do that, and I really wanted to interview someone who has been making music instruments since the beginning of the App Store. I had a lot of fun talking to Jim, and when I asked him about why he made the synth, he basically explains that he wanted to make something as fat as Magellan, but easier to use. And that is what makes Trooper Synthesizer special. It's got that really massive Magellan sound, but without all of the extra pages or scrolling or matrices. It's so easy to use, easy to get into. Any beginner can just pick this one up and get started. It can make any type of sounds if you're into any type of genre, but if you're into synthwave, something that has become popular the past few years, well, this synthesizer does that incredibly well too. Now, if you ended up getting Trooper Synthesizer and if you're into synthwave music, then there is a preset pack out there that you can buy from my preset pack store. It's over at Gumroad, and you can find all the relevant links down in the pinned comment, together with a link to my docutorial on Trooper Synthesizer. Go watch it.
I'm hoping that it accomplished what I wanted to do with it. It's supposed to be like a fat, meaty sounding synth that doesn't get too complicated to use.
Now, the next synthesizer or synthesizers I would like to talk about are the ones that got the most votes in my second synth top roundup. Now, I'm talking about Monolith and Megalith by Bliss. Yes, I am breaking the top list rules by putting two synthesizers in the same spot, but I simply just don't give a fuck.
Watch your profanity.
And let me tell you, if you downloaded Monolith, which is a completely free synthesizer, a very powerful monosynth, if you like that one, you are going to like Megalith even more. It takes Monolith, multiplies it, adds wavetables on top, more modulation, and it also adds way more modulation destinations. So if you're using Monolith and you're looking for an upgrade, but you want that same Bliss sound as a polyphonic synth, well, then you can't go wrong with Megalith. So what makes these synthesizers special? Well, first of all, they both have the Bliss sound. If you've ever used a Bliss synth before, you know the sound I'm talking about. If you don't, then it's not gonna mean much to you, but it's a very specific sound. You can easily make very angry, harsh patches. But of course, you can make really nice sounding mellow patches because of the great filters in there. Another thing I like with their graphical design is that they color code stuff. And then there's an added layer of graphical design that show you what's actually going on in the synth, like here with the envelopes or here with the LFOs. Another thing that you'll find in both Monolith and Megalith is easy ways of setting up expression modulation for keyboards. I have a limited amount of time every year to do reviews for synthesizers and processors and FX apps and stuff, and sometimes there will come out something that I just don't have time to review, and Megalith was one of them. But now when I've sat down here, tried it out for 2 months or so, I just absolutely love it. It's a great synthesizer. But I did get around to reviewing Monolith, and if you want to see that video, you can find a link to it down in the description. Now the next synthesizer is also one I never got around to reviewing. I just didn't have the time for it, but it is an amazing synth. I'd say that Tera Pro is on the same level as Nambu when it comes to the professional sound and how much of haRiGo's work, aka VirSynth, actually goes into this thing. If you like the VirSynth sound, then all of it is available in here. You even have an addictive synth spectrum-like oscillator in here. There are so many modules, so many different waveform modules, and there's even one I haven't even had time to test yet. I just recently found out that haRiGo has added a wavetable oscillator to this thing. When it comes to filters, there's a load. When it comes to modulation, there's a load of them, and they're really easy to set up. You see, all the modulation points are right down here. You get a pop-up list with all of the modulation sources if you just tap one of these boxes, and then you simply set up the modulation amount in negative or positive values with these sliders here. So in that aspect, it's really easy to set up modulation. It's pretty quick and really fun to work with. I love making patches in here, but it can be somewhat confusing to use because when you have a lot of windows open, you end up scrolling a lot back and forth, left and right. And sure, you can hide stuff and you can show stuff, but still it's a bit confusing. So I can get if beginners feel that this one is a little bit daunting to use. So what makes this special? Well, having access to everything that VirSynth has done with synthesizers for the past 2 decades in a semi-modular DIY synth platform is pretty special. However, there are 2 main things I really like in this synth that I don't usually talk about that often whenever I do synth reviews. One of them being how you're working with layering. You see, you can have layer A and you can have layer B, and you can split them up on the keyboard. But you can also very easily, with just 2 taps, switch it so that you're playing A and B at the same time, but you're only editing one of the layers. And then you can easily switch back from this mode seamlessly. I really like that. The second thing I like is the way that you can switch presets while you're playing the synth at the same time without getting that really glitchy jankiness you can sometimes get in some synthesizers. Even Agonizer will get you that when you're switching quickly between 2 very different presets. Well, Tera Pro treats this a little bit nicer, smoother. It does glitch out slightly whenever you're using delays, but that's a common thing with synthesizers. However, if you're a stage performer, you might want to have a look at the synthesizer just for this thing alone. Lastly, I have honorable mentions, and the first one I want to start with is Overdrive Synth by MobiPixel. If you're into VHS synth and its 80s retro sound, you are going to absolutely love Overdrive Synth. Yeah, this thing sounds absolutely delicious. But even though it has synth in its name, just like VHS synth, Overdrive synth is not a synth, it's a rompler. And if you want to find out how Nick made Overdrive synth, there is a short documentary that Nick made over at his channel. Yeah, he also makes YouTube content. And one thing he does is he teaches music app making with AudioKit.
Overdrive Synth app for iOS. It's gonna be really cool. Maybe. Let's get started.
This is why I want to feature him, and I was gonna feature him and Overdrive synth, but I never got around to it. Plus, he kind of already did the documentary that I wanted to make, so in the end, I didn't know what to do with the interview we did.
Playing for country artists. A lot of times our gigs were on the weekend, or I'd be playing down on Broadway.
Well, I will be featuring him at some point because I think his content is good and what he does needs to be lifted. Now here's one that really deserves a spot in this honorable section part of the list. It's Krilla Synth, and it's one of those apps that came out, a lot of people took one look at it and prematurely judged it as maybe not being good enough. Well, I reviewed it, and there's a lot to be said about this synth, but I'm just gonna run a clip from my review of Krilla Synth, which perfectly demonstrates how good this synth can sound. So if you want to go and watch the full review, I've got a link to it down in the description. Now the last honorable mention is not something I've had enough time to check out. Normally I'll spend weeks or months with a synthesizer before I make a video on it, but because of having you 14% here voting for this thing, what I did was I spent 3 days with it. And the one thing that I really like after spending 3 days with it was the filter. It sounds really good. It's got that grit in it that I love so much. And that's the end of the list. Now, if you like the work I do here on the channel, give me a thumbs up. And if you don't like the work I do here on the channel, then I can recommend you a good brain surgeon, because I am Jakob haQ, the Swedish accountant god. You know, by the way, this is not how Swedes talk English when we have like a rough Swedish accent. That's more like a Central European accent. When you make it sound as if you're a character out of Skyrim, that is a Central European accent. If you want to talk more like a Swedish person, then this is how they sound, if they have that very Swedish accent. Especially if they're from the Stockholm area, this is what they will sound like. They will say stuff like chance instead of chance. And if you're from Göteborg, then they might actually sound more like this. Hello, YouTube. Get it right, internet, you You know, I'm getting too riled up for things that don't really mean anything. This is gonna be so sweet. Fit for a fight. As usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it. That's what I usually say. But what I really want to say is have a lot of fun fingering your butt. You might have noticed that there is one synth I never mentioned on this list, which is Thermosynth. It got 6% of the votes. And yeah, why am I not talking about it? Well, it's one of those apps I haven't even purchased, so I don't even own it. I've never tested it. Don't know anything about it, so I won't be talking about it. And that's that.